We are brought to you by Boss Bears Supplements. That's Boss Bears Supplements at bossbears.co. Hard work, consistency, and determination are difficult to sustain when your mind and body can't keep up. Fuel your body with what it needs to perform like a boss. Whether you're closing deals, pitching a new business idea, or training in the gym, Boss Bears take your hustle to the next level. Our ingredients are the highest quality with potency and serving sizes that are the gold standard in the industry. Check out all of Boss Bears products at bossbears.co. They have apple cider vinegar gummies. They have ashwagandha. They have all kinds of supplements in delicious gummy form. They also have them in pill form if you don't want the gummies. I prefer the gummies. They are delicious, and I've tried the apple cider vinegar. They are very good. Use code Nicky at checkout to save 10%. That's bossbears.co, code Nicky. We are brought to you by Clout Power Supplements. That's KLOUTPWR.com. So here I have the protein, the Cravings protein from Clout. This one is the salted caramel. This is some of the best protein that I've ever had in my life. It's actually delicious. I like the salted caramel and the cinnamon swirl are my two favorites. Also, their pre-workouts are amazing. So they have the Karma Nootropic pre-workout. It's a nootropic and focused pre-workout. It's a lower stimulant formula, zero itch formula. It has 4 trademark ingredients, and has fully dosed ingredients. So far, the Arctic Cherry is probably my favorite of the Karma pre-workout. Also, try the Nero Aminos from them. And also the High Stimulant Mamba is some of my favorite too. And I really like the Arctic Cherry of that one. So go to cloutpower.com and use code Nicky to save 15%. KLOUTPWR.com. Code Nicky to save 15%. All right, everybody. Welcome to the Nicky Free Podcast. We are here live with Ronald Fuller, who is the coordinator for the Center for Logic and Business Communication. Ron, how are you, man?
I'm good. Thanks, Nick.
Good to hear from you, dude. Good to have you on. Thank you for being here. And so why don't we just start with letting people know I met you through the gym because you're always at Eastside Gym working out. Mm-hmm. And your 2 sons are always there working really hard, and you're always there working hard with them. So that's how I met Ron. And Ron has something that is important to him. So this is a subject that you, something we used to teach in schools that we maybe don't anymore. So why don't you explain to people a little bit about just like what is logic?
Logic is a really fascinating subject, and it used to be taught in schools widely, even since ancient times. Mm-hmm. But there have been many times in history where it has been unpopular. It has kind of swung back and forth between popularity and unpopularity.
Okay.
It's been enormously influential. Logic has had a huge impact on science,
right,
on religion and politics.
Yes.
All since ancient times.
Mm-hmm. And so in the sense of when you're using the word logic, is this like a certain sort of way of teaching things, or what does logic mean in the sense of like I know what the word logic means for the most part, but like when you're talking about teaching it, what is the practice of logic that we don't teach anymore? Like
that is a great question.
Yeah.
So the word logic, people use it for many, many different things. Today, when people use the word logic, they're normally talking about the way somebody reasons or the kind of arguments that people make. They'll say, I don't follow your logic, or I don't agree with your logic.
Right. That always happens.
Yeah,
yes.
That's the way people use logic today.
Okay.
But logic is an actual academic subject. It's one of the oldest academic subjects in history. Mm-hmm. Only mathematics, philosophy, and maybe you could say rhetoric are older than logic, but it's an ancient academic subject,
right?
And it is still taught in universities today.
Okay.
And the first half, if you take a logic class in a school today, the first half of that logic class is going to be very similar to the logic taught by the Stoics since ancient times, since 4th century BC.
Right.
And we've learned a lot more about how to use logic. We've learned a lot more about knowledge representation, how to represent knowledge so that we can use logic with that knowledge. But the actual subject matter of logic has remained relatively unchanged. Now, there were some major advancements and discoveries about how to use logic and how to represent knowledge in the 1800s and early 1900s.
Okay.
And some people consider that to be a new kind of logic.
Right.
But
So
but
different from what was being taught before that.
well, I would say it's an extension. It's not. It doesn't change it. For a long time, people thought that ancient logic was obsolete and it was no longer needed.
And who originally was teaching logic? Like, where did it all come from? Because you sent me down a rabbit hole kind of when we started talking about this. Because like, we go through life and we live in this time to us that's very modern, right? And we have computers and we have cell phones and we have like the basic understanding. We go to school, we're taught a certain thing. And like, we kind of forget that all this knowledge is built on like our ancestors building this base. And then we're taught this base and it's like passed down through generations. And we just like, take it for granted. It's like, well, of course, we just know this. But the weird thing is when I started looking down that rabbit hole, there's been so many different times of different kinds of teachings and different people that made huge contributions, to the base of knowledge that we have. And then also, different camps that argued about which things were good or which things were bad. And so you got me down that rabbit hole. So like, what were some of the historical teachers that kind of like founded logic, the idea of teaching logic, and like, where did it come from originally?
Aristotle is the first logician.
Okay.
Now you will hear some commentators that will say that for example, there's a book. Will Durant who wrote a book on the histories of civilization. He says that the sophists. Sophists were a group of people. They came before Aristotle. He said they were the greatest logicians of ancient times, but they were not logicians. They had a sense of logic enough to abuse it, to use it.
And who were some of the famous sophists? Like,
let's see.
Just for the smart people out there listening.
Well, let me see here. Maybe you read that article I sent you.
I did finally. You kept sending me all this good stuff, and I finally did get around to it. And I also read the link you sent me yesterday.
Okay.
But it was interesting because the link you sent me yesterday was where it was talking about how there was a certain book written by somebody that some of our schooling is still based on. That's like kind of old and out of date, but we still kind of follow, like, these were the reasons that he thought logic shouldn't be taught in schools. And that was that article that you had just sent me. But so Aristotle, what were some of the Aristotle's, what are some of the contributions that he made to the knowledge that we have right now? Because that name, everybody knows the name Aristotle, but like, how much do we, unless you're really into history, like, we forget all this stuff, from school. So
we credit Aristotle for discovering or introducing logic because he was the first person to explain the concept of validity.
Okay. Yep. So proving something is a valid point, or like
explaining the concept of validity.
Okay.
Right, and distinguishing valid patterns from invalid patterns.
And so the opposite of valid would be invalid.
That's right. Yeah.
So if you're trying to prove something, you need validity versus invalidity, huh?
That's right.
Okay, that makes sense. So now, is this like kind of the idea, like, that feelings and stuff don't matter? It's like there is a real truth.
Okay.
Sometimes.
This is a huge misconception.
Okay.
A lot of people, when they think of logic, they think that logic is the opposite of emotion.
Right.
Not true.
Because that's what I would have thought.
When people talk about that distinction, what they're really talking about is the distinction between practicality and emotion.
Right.
Okay, so there's sometimes you want to follow your heart, sometimes you want to follow your mind.
Right.
Logic doesn't tell us anything about either of those things. We can use logic to reason about those things. We can use logic to make valid inferences based on our feelings and emotions, use logic to make valid inferences about things that are practical. And people can make mistakes either way. You can make mistakes while reasoning about things of the heart. You can make mistakes while reasoning about things that are practical. So that's a false distinction. And the only reason I think that people make that mistake today is that we don't understand logic at all because it's no longer taught in schools.
Right.
It doesn't come naturally. Logic does not.
No,
come
because
naturally.
like when I think of logic, that's what I think of. I think of like, maybe there's something that you want to be true, and so you start using confirmation bias and all these type of things to like prove your point. Like, I told you this is like, she's cheating on you, bro. I know it. I saw this. I saw this. In the meantime, none of it's true at all. But once you get this idea in your head that you've created this story, and then it's easy to use confirmation bias to get, other people to believe the same story. And before long, you have this whole, rumor concocted that so-and-so is cheating on so-and-so. None of it is based in any kind of facts or truth.
Right.
So that's like my head thing is like, I feel like there's like truth and then there's like stories, and it's hard to distinguish between the two sometimes.
Right. Now, logic is not going to help you. What logic?
So that has nothing to do with logic.
Well, it has to do with logic in the sense that logic can tell you what must be true as a consequence of other things, if those other things are true. Now, here's what I think is the most important thing to understand about logic. Okay. So logic can tell us with absolute certainty that if A implies B, and A is true, then B must be true. But logic cannot tell us if A really does imply B in any given situation.
Right.
And it cannot tell us if A really is true in any given situation. In those cases, we have to look towards the subject that we're talking about. If our claim about if A implies B, if that is a claim about science, we have to look at the evidence. If it's a claim about TV ratings or a political subject, you have to look at those situations, ask the experts, or look at the evidence to determine if A implies B in those situations.
Right.
Okay. And if whether or not A is true,
So you can't just use A implies B, so therefore,
if
B is true. Well, if A is true, then B is true also.
Here's an example. So imagine a young child riding with his family in a car and sees another car on the side of the road, and the car's on the side of the road. The kid will ask, "Why is that car on the side of the road?" And mom might say, "Well, it looks like they have a flat tire."
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next week, the kid will see another car on the side of the road and say, "Look, another car with a flat tire."
But they're stopped for completely different reasons.
Dad might say, "Well, it doesn't look like any of their tires are flat. Maybe they ran out of gas."
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have a flat tire, you're gonna have to pull over to the side of the road. But if you're pulled over to the side of the road,
it doesn't always mean you have a flat tire.
So that's the case where if A implies B, but B does not imply A.
Right.
So that would be called a bidirectional implication. Okay. And we would describe that as if and only if. You'd say the car is pulled over to the side of the road if and only if you have a flat tire, and obviously that's false.
That's not true. Yeah.
But an implication does not. If A implies B, B does not imply A.
Yes.
Okay. Not
I
necessarily.
get it. Yeah.
If it does, well, first of all, in daily life, most of that kind of precision is not needed. Okay. You don't need that level of precision. In fact, the guy that is usually credited with being the founder of modern logic, a German logician named Gottlob Frege, he said that logic is to language as a microscope is to the eyes. So the eyes are incredibly versatile. You can use the eyes. I'm looking at you with my eyes.
Right.
I can look at a landscape with my eyes.
But if we wanted to see the bacteria in my mouth, we'd have to use a microscope.
have to use a microscope.
But for regular daily life, we're not going to need
that's right.
that.
And not only do we not need it, it would be a terrible choice. You don't want to use a microscope. If I was looking at you through a microscope, it would be blurry. I couldn't see a thing.
Right.
If I wanted to look at a landscape, I couldn't see a thing. So our eyes are enormously versatile. Mm-hmm. But if you want to look at something small, you got to use a microscope. Now, logic is the same way. For an ordinary communication, natural language is great. Mm-hmm. However, natural language is filled with ambiguity and implication. And most of the time, those things are useful because they make conversations easier and shorter. Because it lets you rely on context clues and shared experiences.
Right.
So you don't have to spell everything out in detail.
Yeah.
Okay? So most of the time, our conversation right now, we could probably go back and make a list of all the implications, all the assumptions that we think that the other person knows.
Yeah.
We just assume that if people know that. And because we have this shared cultural experience, we don't have to spell all those things out.
No, but have you on the same token, have you ever had a conversation with somebody and then halfway through it you realize they have no idea what you're talking about?
Well,
But you were kind of like because say you're like having a conversation with your coworkers, you're right, there's so much implied stuff. Like I can say a few words and my coworkers know exactly what I'm talking about because we spend so much time together. But the thing is, sometimes you'll assume people are understanding. You're so used to people understanding what you're trying to say, but you'll run into a person where all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, they're not getting what you're saying at all.
Right.
And it's because you don't have enough of that shared. Like, you actually do need to spell it out sometimes.
That's right. Now, some of that has to do with shared knowledge. Others has to do with cultural context. For example, if I told you that my friend is in jail.
Yeah.
Okay, there's lots of, what things does that imply? That might imply that he got picked up by the cops.
Yeah.
Maybe he did something wrong.
No idea why. Just he's in jail.
Yeah, but you probably assume that he appeared before a judge.
Yeah.
And that the judge made a decision. Okay, we have all these assumptions because of our cultural context. Somebody from a different culture, you tell him that your friend is in jail. His first thought would be maybe he didn't pay off the right the right politician or maybe he insulted a police officer.
Oh, because in other countries, some of that stuff happens every day.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you have cultural contexts that inform and so you have these implications. So when you're using logic to talk about something, logic's not useful to talk about daily things, but it's useful to understand logic because it can help you understand how implications can affect other people's the inferences that they draw. Okay, and so and especially some communication really should be precise, like contracts. Mm-hmm. Okay, understanding marketers. Some marketers oftentimes make claims that really people should ask follow-up questions, to clarify those claims, and marketers use the fact that people don't really understand correct inference, and so they're not really going to ask tough questions. Politicians do too.
Yeah.
They'll say things all the time, and they know that people don't really understand the concept of implication and validity and invalidity, so they don't have to worry about people asking tough follow-up questions, and most of the time they don't.
Well, and also with that, it's like that implied thing of not wanting to ruin there is this weird thing where those kind of people can get away with a lot because people don't want to ruin the, you're just trying to be kind to them or whatever, or you don't want to be the turd in the punch bowl or whatever. Or so somebody could make a bunch of wild claims and just out of being nice or kindness, people won't call them out on stuff sometimes.
Could be.
So they can get away with. I mean, that happens too. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And I think in cultures in the past where logic was more widely taught, when all educated people understood logic, mm-hmm. you'd see much less of that because marketers and politicians would not assume that they'd be able to get away with it. They would
right.
If they tried to pull something like that, they're not gonna they're not going to be comfortable in the thought that they're just going to.
Well, what about now when basically we all just know they're lying to us at all times? Well, what about that situation?
Well, a lot of times we.
But some people don't. Still,
sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and sometimes it might have to do with
need to know or
It's hard to say, but for sure, the politicians and marketers are oftentimes the greatest.
Marketers seems like a big one because they're trying to sell something.
Right.
Yeah. What about scam artists too?
Sure. Yeah.
Same type of thing.
Yeah. In fact, Aristotle he actually was motivated to do the work that led to the discovery of logic. He was motivated to do that by these group of folks called the sophists. And,
yes.
Okay. And
we talked a little about them.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the sophists, they were mostly, I guess, in today's terms, you'd call them political communications consultants. Okay. So they made their living teaching communication techniques to politicians and young men that wanted to become politicians, and their focus was on reasoning techniques that a lot of people recognized even back then as abusive and manipulative. Yes. And I gave an example in one of my articles that you read from this is in a book by Plato called Euthydemus, where a sophist says, "Is this your dog?" "Yes, this is my dog." Well, this dog has puppies, so this dog is a father. Yes, this dog is a father. So this is your dog. This dog is a father, so this dog is your father. Okay.
Yeah, which makes no sense.
That sounds like something that my boy Spencer would have come up with when he was 12 years old.
Right. You're like, oh yeah. If this is a father, so that means it's your father, right? Yeah.
And so
it's like, well, no, not necessarily. Yeah.
Right. And so that type of manipulative and abusive use of reasoning, Aristotle's his teacher was Plato. And Plato, when Plato was in his earlier years, he thought that the sophists were clever and smart, and it seems like he might have had a high regard for them. But later in his life, he had a great disdain for the sophists. He thought that they were the scourge of Athens. They were the main reason that the Athenian democracy failed.
And it was because they were able to manipulate regular people so much.
That's right. They influenced the politicians and they manipulated regular people.
Okay.
And they used their knowledge and skills for the personal gain and political power. And Plato thought that was one of the main reasons that Athenian democracy failed. And
and he thought that maybe the people deserved more respect, or they deserve.
Well, he saw the Athenian democracy as the reason that the Athens collapsed.
Didn't he believe that democracy was not, there should be no democracy? Or?
Plato hated
democracy.
Yeah,
okay.
he blamed democracy for the death of his teacher Socrates.
Yeah.
And for the collapse of Athens, and so he wrote a famous book called the Republic.
Yes.
Where he proposes a different approach. He thought that people should be ruled by philosopher kings, and the Republic has been enormous. That's probably the most influential book on philosophy ever written, and much of like communism is based a lot on the Republic, and modern communists and tyrants, they will look at the Republic to justify
the stuff they want to do.
Yeah, the stuff that they want to do. They want to prop themselves up as philosopher kings.
Yeah.
So
it's like regular people aren't smart enough to rule themselves. They need us to do it for them.
Right.
Basically.
Right. And if you lived in ancient Athens during the age of the sophists, you might agree with that. Okay.
Right.
But Aristotle, he loved freedom. He had a lot of respect for his teacher Plato, but he differed with him on many counts.
I remember reading that in the article. So that was where he differed. He believed in democracy.
Well, I don't know that
but more so than Plato.
He recognized the problems with democracy, especially Athenian democracy.
Yeah.
But he believed he thought that freedom was important, and he thought that the problems of the sophists could be overcome. He wrote a book called Sophistical Refutations that basically means the fallacies of the sophists. Where he outlines how to respond to these abusive and manipulative techniques that the sophists wrote, and that book Sophistical Refutations was the main precursor to his what we recognize now as the first book on logic, which is Prior Analytics. So Sophistical Refutations is about specific kinds of the schools still teach those today in what we call informal logic.
Okay.
And then prior analytics is about formal logic, which is going even more basic and more fundamental and abstracting out, separating the form from the content, so you can reason we can recognize valid and invalid forms of the arguments without even considering the subject matter. So an argument can have a valid form, but it can be totally false. Or you can have an invalid form, but the argument can be true, or the conclusion can be true, and so they're separate. And it's important to recognize the difference so that you can prepare yourself to avoid being deceived and avoid making mistakes yourself.
Right. And so you said it was Socrates and then Plato. And Plato was the one who thought that he believed in freedom more.
No, Plato.
So Plato was the one that hated democracy. It was Aristotle. After him, he was the one that believed in freedom more.
Yes, I think he appreciated freedom more than Plato. Well,
and he was the one who believed that regular people should be taught logic. Because wasn't there something about?
I don't know that So you might be thinking of Petrus Ramus. He was a French Renaissance humanist, and he thought that ordinary people could and should learn logic. Aristotle might have, but I don't know if we can.
Because like you said, there's not a lot of need for it in regular everyday stuff. So there were certain people that believed it shouldn't be taught to regular people.
Yes, throughout history, there have been people that thought that it should not be taught to regular people. For example, later on, after hundreds of years after Aristotle, in the Roman Republic, only the very wealthy Romans were taught logic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But as far Aristotle saw logic as a tool for philosophers and scientists.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So this all kind of ties back to philosophy a little bit too, huh?
Yeah, logic relates closely to it's. Some people consider it to be part of philosophy. Aristotle was of course a philosopher, but
and what does the word philosophy mean?
Well, the love of
love
knowledge,
of knowledge,
the love
right?
of knowledge, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, which it seems like we should all love that, you know.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have some favorite philosophers?
Yeah, I like Aristotle's probably up there.
Up there. Yeah.
And I think
I always like Marcus Aurelius a lot.
Yeah, in fact, he was notable in the history of logic because he was the last of the sophists.
Yeah.
And the sophists were great students and teachers of logic.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, those a lot of those Stoic ones. I there's so many of us now. Like we all follow these like Stoic quote Instagram. Yeah. Where we're just getting these Stoic quotes every day. But the funny thing about them is like, if you apply them to your life, a lot of them actually make a lot of sense, and they work. Some of these Stoic, like there's certain things that we get so wrapped up in and like worry ourselves over, and if you follow some of these Stoic principles, it's like they don't matter really.
Yeah.
And if you just can like get yourself to that point, it actually can help you quite a bit with some of the Stoic philosophy. So I like some of that stuff, man. It's like inspirational.
Yeah, that book. It was a book that Marcus Aurelius wrote.
What is it called?
I forgot the name of the book, but that's a great book.
Yeah.
And the Stoics were hugely influential on the early Christianity as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me look that up for us.
Yeah.
The book that Marcus Aurelius wrote.
Yeah.
So book.
Meditations.
Yeah, is that what it is?
I think so.
Yeah.
And yes, the most famous Stoic is Protagoras. Protagoras.
And why do I know that name?
Protagoras? I don't know. He's a famous sophist.
Not Pythagoras. That's the Pythagorean theory.
Protagoras.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was Meditations. You're right. So.
And another reason you might know the name Protagoras is that he was famous for saying that man is the measure of all things.
Okay.
Yeah. He thought that all knowledge was relative.
Okay. Now explain that a little bit.
Well, the idea that all knowledge is relative, that's that's an ancient idea, and some people disagree. And I would certainly disagree, and I think...
So what does that mean? That's the idea that basically nothing's really real, it's only real if I believe something and then I tell it to you, and then you also believe it. Now it's real to both of us, but in reality it's not really real, it's just that I got you to agree that it's real. Like this is a chair.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, yeah, this is a stool, or we'll call it a stool. But in reality, like it's really not. It's only a stool because me and you both agree it's a stool, right?
Well, okay, and a lot of people believe they'll. It's common to hear the saying that perception is reality.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Which I do like to use that because.
Well, there's a certain practicality to that, but it can also, I think, can be a corrupt notion. I think.
Right. The thing about perception as reality is like I don't think you should apply it to things like real concrete things like science, and like even if me and you agree this is called a stool, it doesn't really matter what word we use for it. We could like go into like where the word originated from and why we call it a stool, but like at the end of the day, we know what it means. It's a thing that looks like this, and we can sit on it, and it's real, and I can touch it, right?
Okay.
So whether or not we decide to agree on calling it a stool or not, it is what it is, no matter what we call it.
Yeah,
it's real, right?
People can bicker and haggle over whatever they want.
But the thing that I like about perception as reality is in the creative realm. So like that's where it's like perception as reality is kind of cool because it's like, how you carry or conduct yourself, like even in pro wrestling, which I did, like if you have a character and you conduct yourself a certain way and you get enough people to believe in that, then the perception that you put out there becomes reality to all these people.
Okay.
So like in creative endeavors or like music, same thing. Like it's like he's the most badass singer. He's the this, like that's perception. It's
Okay.
like, you know what I'm saying? So like, it's just kind of like getting people to believe in you. So like in things like that, like art, creative things, I think it's definitely an important tool to use.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like if you're like trying to be the best singer, like you want to be like Prince or something, it's like if you believe that and then you get other people to believe in it, it's real. You know what I'm saying? But like if you're talking about like science, like, and you tell me like, this could like, it's like there's certain things that are real. So perception is reality doesn't work. Like if I said, well, this is made out of water. Like, even though if I say it and I get two other people to believe in it, it's not going to make it true.
Right.
And maybe there is some water in it. I don't know. But that's so I'm saying like
that concept can be really badly abused.
Yeah.
Especially
what are some ways you think people abuse it? Let's hear like
nothing really comes to mind. I was in the Army Reserves for a while, and I was mobilized and served in active units in the Army, and that was unfortunately something that you would hear now and then.
Perception is reality.
In other words, don't concern yourself with the truth. This is the way that the people perceive it, and so we're going to go with this way, and so shut up and do what you're told.
Right.
Okay, and sometimes doing what you're told, following orders, that is important. But when it comes to corruption, and I'm not saying that the Army.
No, but there has
corrupt.
been times where there's been corruption and stuff.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. And another place where there is where that the concept of perception as reality is false is in logical validity.
Right.
Okay. So logical validity is perfectly objective. It doesn't rely at all on opinion or perception. It's it can be determined by a machine or by any person if they know the rules.
Yeah.
But then again, a logical validity by itself really doesn't tell you anything. It's a super useful tool, but it doesn't tell you anything.
Mm-hmm.
But it's useful because it allows you to apply it to knowledge that you already have, whether that knowledge is true or false. Okay, it can let you apply it to knowledge that you already have to gain an understanding of what else must be true or may be true because of your premises. And so,
is there like some kind of real world example you can give people of using logic, like what's just any example where it would like come in handy?
For ordinary people in their daily life, whenever even though natural language, we talked about how handy natural language is because you don't have to spell out all the implication details.
Right.
Sometimes even in daily life, people misunderstand you because because of imprecision in the language. For example, just saying if this then that, if this then that. Let's see. The example I gave you with the kid in the car.
Yep.
A lot of times, if you make an if-then statement, people think that you mean if and only if.
Okay.
Like
so
you
that's
say,
the distinction.
Yeah. So if my wife asked me, I asked her what does she want for dinner. She'll say, well, I'll ask her out on a date. She'll say, I'll go out if you take me to pizza.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, what about pasta? She says, okay, pasta.
Yeah.
So that doesn't negate the first statement. Mm-hmm. Okay.
She would have went for pizza too.
That's right. She didn't say if and only if. So sometimes when people say if, then they mean there might be other options too. Other times they mean if and only if.
Right.
And same with the word or. Okay. The word or, you say if you're say you're taking college classes and the catalog says that in order to graduate you have to take this class or that class.
Yes.
Does that mean that if you take both of them, you can't graduate? No, you have to take one or the other, and both is okay. Mm-hmm. Other times, or means exclusively. Like I will give you. Let's see. Take.
You can either sometimes or means only this or only this.
That's right.
Yeah.
This or that. Sometimes it's exclusive, and logic gives you the tools.
Like you can have this cake or this cookie, and it means
both.
I'm going to eat the other one, so
That's
you
right.
only get one of them.
But not both.
Yeah. Whereas the other example, you get both of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so having an understanding of logic can help people be aware of when misunderstandings like that are possible.
Right.
And misunderstandings happen all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Due to ambiguities in logic.
Okay.
Ambiguities in
Do
natural
you have any
language.
examples of that?
Oh, none come to mind right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I could maybe
Make one up or something.
Well, how about you? Did any come to your mind?
Well, I'm still trying to get a handle on this logic thing.
Okay.
Like I kind of understand it, but I'm like, so like, what got you so interested in it for starters? Let's talk about that.
Well,
Like, was it being in the Army growing up, or like,
so
what sparked your interest in this? Was it studying those old?
So I took a class in logic in school. I had a roommate that I was looking for another class to take. I needed a humanities credit.
Right.
And my roommate said, well, take this logic class with me. It seems like a pretty cool class.
Uh-huh.
So I signed up for the logic class, and it was fascinating. I loved the class.
Yeah.
Now, other people have different experiences. My dad took a logic class at a continuing education. Well, actually, it wasn't continuing education. It was a normal college class in a university in our hometown. And his teacher said that 30% of you are going to drop out the first day. The next 30% are going to drop out next week.
Because he made it so hard, or
yeah, and then he said, and the people who stay, only 50% are going to pass because logic is really hard. He's one kind of person that thought that the only special people can understand logic.
Yeah.
Whereas my teacher thought that logic is something that anybody can learn. And
so you had a better teacher, probably.
Oh, a way better teacher.
Yeah.
Now there's nothing wrong with having a really advanced logic class if the students know that and they choose it.
Yes.
But if you have just a general introduction to logic that anybody can register for, I think that's terrible to do that. It's terrible. Because people come to those classes with widely different levels of preparation. Mm-hmm. It's very much like learning how to read. Okay, when young kids learn how to read, some kids are coming from families with lots of books in the home.
Yeah, they maybe started before.
Yeah. And some kids are coming from families that don't
read at all.
Think about
never
it.
Even. Yeah.
And so you have to teach people at the level that they're prepared for. And there are others that will say, oh, those people just they don't have the capacity to learn how to read, so let's not worry about teaching them.
Right.
And there are many times in history where people have felt that about logic, and that is true. I think today. I think it's true today that people think that logic is.
Because I don't think I ever learned anything about logic in school.
Well, you didn't have to. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not it's by no through no.
Well,
fault
no,
of your
I'm
own.
saying it is. I mean, I don't. I think our education system could really use a revamp in general.
Yeah.
I believe our education system is like this basic system that was like made to put factory workers into a factory, basically, and that's all they basically taught people was how to be like. I mean, that's all they teach you is basically how to follow orders. They teach you to be, conform to whatever you're supposed to do. They're basically teaching people how to be good factory workers. That's what I think. I think we need a lot of work in education.
Well,
they don't teach people how to like be ready for the real world at all.
Right.
They basically teach you like you need to go to college and take out student loans. That's the number one thing they taught me.
Yeah.
Was we need to get you hooked on this student loan scam. That's all they've drilled into my head.
That's a disaster.
And I don't like that, man.
Right.
I feel like there's so much more we could teach people how to actually have good careers in the real world, and maybe like more of a respect for like certain jobs that are more like blue collar and stuff again. I think that would be good too.
Yeah, trade schools.
Trades and
trade
stuff,
schools.
man. Yeah.
And logic is helpful for anybody. I think logic helps people to learn to ask good questions. Mm-hmm. Okay, and to ask follow-up questions, clarifying questions.
Yes.
Questions to discover correct inferences. Mm-hmm. Like the situation with the kid in the car. If you're learning a trade and you learn that doing something results in that, maybe a good question is, well, does anything else also cause that?
Right.
Or does doing this cause this and other things as well?
It's funny because that's how welding was, like learning how to weld.
No.
There's certain things where there's different things that might lead to the same result, or so you're kind of using it all the time.
Right. And when you learn a trade, learning those inferences is part of the learning process for that trade.
Yes.
Okay. Logic, I think if people started off with a couple years of logic training, training in other things, I think, would be easier.
Right.
Because the process of learning the inferences that are specific to a given trade or profession, that process I think could be easier for people.
Okay, so
now, that's a controversial claim, but I think it's probably true.
Now, so when you took a logic class like that one that got you so interested in it, what were the kind of things you were learning in that class?
Okay, we started off
to give people a better idea. Like when we keep talking about logic, but I still feel like people probably don't really understand it.
Okay.
You know, and like what are some of the things you learned? Like I kind of get it. It's a way of like clarifying things, right?
So the concepts that you learn are validity, invalidity, inference, entailment. Entailment basically means logical consequence,
right?
And things like that, and proof.
Yes.
Did you ever do geometric proofs?
Dude, I was the best at proofs. You know what's funny? I could not tell you. I don't remember how to do a proof at all, but I, for whatever reason, was really good at geometry, and like I killed it at proofs.
Yeah.
Even to the point where my teacher was like, "Whoa, like you're good at this." And now, if you ask me to write, I don't even remember proofs. Okay. I don't remember anything about them, but I was really good at it back then.
You'd probably come back to you pretty quickly.
I'm sure if somebody explained, it's so weird how much knowledge we'll get and then dump, and then dump. You know, you study for a test, you take the test, and then you dump all that information.
Yeah. So I think geometry was another very important precursor to logic.
I loved geometry.
Yeah, geometry. Yeah. So geometry is actually older than logic.
Yeah.
And geometric proofs were done long before anybody did logical proofs.
Okay.
And logic, from one perspective, is a generalization of that kind of reasoning. Geometric proofs are reasoning about these geometry axioms. Okay?
Right.
Axioms are the things that, and the proofs they say are given.
Yeah, my teacher was so good too. Right. That's probably why I got it.
Yeah.
You know, he would just like sit up there and he'd talk about a point in space, and he would be visual with it, and like. Yeah, so it is. Yeah. You're right. When you have a good teacher, man, it changes everything.
Yeah, and for thousands of years, geometry was the place where many people got excellent practice with logic, with deductive reasoning.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasoning in it. Yeah.
Well, and not just reasoning, but specifically deductive reasoning, which is what logic is all about.
Right.
Now learning geometry doesn't. I mean, it's only concerned with these geometric. Right.
Postures. So it's not like you're learning logic.
Maybe. Well, in a way, you are. You're exercising, you're practicing deductive reasoning, and it's not necessarily guaranteed that people will be able to abstract that and learn in other things. But if you're taught specifically, if you're taught that geometry is an application of logic.
Yes.
And it becomes evident to you, then learning geometry and doing geometric proofs. Becomes good practice for
logic. Okay, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one of my favorite classes actually, geometry. Mm-hmm. That, and then there was one called Statics and Strengths of Materials. I don't know why, that was another one that I really liked, but it's so weird you remember stuff from school what. Yeah, there are just certain things like math was always something I really liked. Yeah. You know, now looking back, I wish I would have took history a little more serious. You know, because then maybe I'd know more about some of these things, like, you know, Aristotle and Socrates.
Yeah, well, you know, I liked history okay, but I wasn't a real huge, real great student of history.
Yeah.
But since I took an interest in logic,
history comes with that.
Now there's a reason. You know, I really want to go back and look at these things. Why did people have these attitudes? Why did they do what they did? Why did things happen what they did? Now history is you know, now that I have a reason, a specific thing to study it for.
Right, and so what was it about that logic class that just really resonated with you?
It seemed to me that after the first day of that class, I thought, wow, this should be required learning for everyone.
And it was just something where you're like, I've never thought about things in this way.
That's right, yeah.
And it's like, this is so valuable once you got it, right? Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
And I didn't know at the time, but later on, I learned that for much of history, it was a required subject. For much of history, you could not possibly be considered an educated person without learning logic.
And when did that shift?
Well, it shifted multiple times.
Okay, so it's been a back and forth battle, up and down.
Yeah.
And right now, you would say that it's not being taught.
Oh, it's not. No, it's not.
Not at all.
Well, I would say that I estimate that less than 2% of all people who have ever attended college have taken a logic class.
So a few classes maybe here and there. If they
less than 2% of college people who attended college means
98% of people that go to college don't learn it at all.
That's right, and only 30% of people go to college.
Yeah.
And so that turns out to less than a fraction of 1% of people have ever taken a logic class.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Which is probably why I have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
Well, but
it's like,
I think you're getting it.
No, I'm sort of getting it.
You're getting the sense of what I'm talking about.
I do understand it. I'm just trying to help with people listening because it's something that's really important to you, and it's something that you feel should be taught in school. So I want people listening to kind of I'm sort of getting the idea of what it is. It's just this way of reasoning, basically.
It's a tool for reasoning.
It's a tool for reasoning, and what can you prove things to be true with it or not true?
Well,
valid or invalid.
If your starting assumptions are true, then you can do proofs that prove that if certain things are true, then certain conclusions are true, or certain things are entailed by the other things. Logic cannot tell you if your assumptions are true. You have to, like I said, you have to do that some other way.
Okay.
And people make mistakes all the time.
Right.
But logic is a.
But in a sense, it's going against the idea of the people basically using language to manipulate people. If you had more, would you say that if you had a better understanding of logic, it would be a lot harder for someone to manipulate you?
Yes, definitely.
And that's kind of the point of why you think it should be taught, right?
Well, there's lots of reasons it should be taught. Logic also helps you evaluate evidence.
Okay.
If you do a scientific experiment and come out with certain conclusions. For example, I don't know if you heard about those guys at the University of Utah that thought that they invented cold fusion.
Okay.
They used good deductive reasoning. They made valid arguments, but their assumptions were false.
Okay.
And other people who knew about those assumptions were able to use valid reasoning to show why their conclusions were not true, even
though their argument was good.
Right. Now, I didn't mean to say that they were proved that their conclusions were not true. They used it to prove that their premises were not true, and they used logic to evaluate the evidence that they had.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So even something can be wrong, but have a really compelling case, and a lot of people could believe it was right.
Right, and that happens all the time.
Yeah. And that happens in science a lot, I'm sure.
It does. It does happen in science.
Which is that's so. The crazy thing about science is how much it changes.
Yeah.
So it's always I always feel a little leery when people say stuff like trust the science and it's because science is an ever-changing thing.
Yeah.
And I feel with science, you should always I think the number one thing in science is you should be wanting challenges. If your science is good enough, you should want anybody to come and try to prove it wrong, right?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's what I love about science, dude. Science is cool. I just saw this study that I don't know if this is true, but there was just this new study about short people are more prone to being psychopaths or something.
Okay.
Did you see that new study yet? And I was well, it kind of makes sense,
So I'd like to tell you about some interesting things. Many scientists believe that science is going downhill.
And what about science is going downhill
so
recently?
There's an article by a fellow. Let me look at it.
Oh, I think it has been a lot, and I think a lot of it is because of money. You know what I'm saying?
Let's see. There was the name. I can't remember the name, but he was an editor of one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world.
Yeah.
And he said that science has taken a turn towards darkness because of. Give me a second to pull up this quote.
Yeah, go ahead and pull that up. Well, I do think that money has definitely infected science a lot. If you want something proven by science and you have enough money, you can probably make it seem that way. It's
Yeah. Science can be
it can be manipulated and abused.
And abused by big companies, by big governments.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a book called State of Fear by Michael Crichton. I don't know if you remember Michael Crichton, the guy that wrote Jurassic Park and everything. And he talked about that, how like even just manipulating data to like show just certain portions of the data can paint a picture to make things look a certain way so easily. Just like you take a graph, but you take just part of the graph, and it can make it look like, whatever you're wanting to prove just by changing the size of the graph, basically. Stuff like that. So like manipulating data in a way, like if you want to say your toothpaste is the best, like there's so many ways to manipulate. So it's not like you're lying. You're still showing real evidence, but you're showing the evidence you want to show. And if they had the context of the entire picture, it would be like, oh, well, this isn't actually what it's claiming to be,
Right.
So that was a really interesting book. If anybody wants to, that was a dude who I wish he was still around, is Michael Crichton.
Yeah. Okay. Here's the quote: "The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may be simply untrue, afflicted by studies with small sample sizes, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analysis, and flagrant conflicts of interest, together with an obsession for pursuing fashionable trends of dubious importance. Science has taken a turn towards darkness." Now,
yeah. Who said that? You said it a minute ago, I think. But.
I think his last name is Horton.
Mm-hmm.
Richard Horton. That's right, Richard Horton.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, I think that the decline of logic is complicit in that for a number of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First of all, logic has always been closely associated with ethics.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, even from the beginning of both, Aristotle was the first person to write about logic. He was also the first person to write about ethics.
Yeah.
Now, logic cannot tell you what ethics to choose.
Right.
Okay, you have to determine what ethics to choose based on your values.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
beliefs, values,
that's
all
right.
that. Yeah.
But logic, they're related because they're both about consequence. Logic is about consequence in general.
Okay.
Okay, what things are entailed by other things, and ethics is about the consequences of our beliefs and actions and behavior.
Yes.
Okay, and a decline throughout history, in each of the periods where logic has declined,
right,
bad things have increased. Ethics have decreased. Corruption has increased. Violence increased in all of those periods.
Yeah, well, if you think logic is declined and you're saying that comes along with it, I would say that makes a lot of sense, because I would say corruption, lack of ethics, money and like everything is pretty bad in that sense right now.
Yeah, right now we are in a period of overlapping progress and decay.
Yeah.
Okay, and that pattern has been repeated a number of other times.
Right.
Okay.
And so we could probably look through history and kind of see where we're at.
That's right.
But I don't want people to get it wrong, though. Like, I love the time we're in at the same time.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I think in a certain sense, it's the best time that it's ever existed to be alive.
Right.
We've gotten so much better at certain things. It's been a lot better for minority groups, other women. Mm-hmm. We've made so much progress in a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at, like, what's that dude, Pinker? There's, like, that guy that, basically does statistics, and, like, even though there's a lot of terrible shit happening, it's still, like, statistically the safest and best time it's ever existed to be alive.
Yep.
So, like, don't get me wrong. Like, I think it's awesome to be alive right now. But when you look at things like corruption in politics, money in politics, like, just like you said, like lack of ethics and morals and stuff, like, we're definitely, something's going on with that right now for sure.
Right.
Like, corruption for sure is one of the worst. When you have things like Citizens United and stuff like that, where, like, corporations get to be like people, and I don't know, man. I don't know how you fix all that stuff.
Yeah. And if the patterns of history hold, and I think they will hold, if we don't start teaching logic, our capacity for science, our capacity for our the institutions that have led to the improvements that you talked about,
right?
Those things will continue to decay. Things will continue to get better for a while.
Right.
The rate of increase will slow.
Okay.
Eventually, the rate of increase will stop. Eventually, the rate of increase will reverse.
Yeah.
We will lose our capacity
Progress.
for progress, and we will decline.
Okay.
Okay,
And so, like, is this something like the fall of Rome type of thing, or just like
it's hard to say. Historically, some of the declines have been very
sudden?
quick and catastrophic. Others have been very slow and hard to pinpoint.
Right.
But in each case, the
And you think logic is playing into this in some sense?
Yes. If you'd like, we could go through what some of those periods are.
Yeah, we should.
Okay.
Actually, why not, man?
Okay.
Yeah, why not?
Okay. Well, I've identified what we could call golden ages or golden eras of logic literacy. There's been 4 of them. And the things that they have in common, there's 2 things they have in common. One is that they embrace logic. And by embrace logic, I mean that logic is widely taught, at least among educated people. Okay.
Right.
And 2, they do not abuse logic, which means the technical term is they make a distinguish between logic and ontology, which means basically that they understand the limitations of logic.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Either implicitly or explicitly, and I'll explain that a little more as we go.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
So the first period of logic of golden age of logic literacy happened shortly after shortly after Aristotle. Okay?
Yes. Okay. Yep.
Okay, and it ended with the death of Marcus Aurelius. He was the last of the Stoics.
Right.
Okay. Now, after he died, Christians still studied logic, but they did not have any political authority for hundreds of years.
Okay.
Okay. So with the decline of Stoicism, also came the decline of the Roman Empire.
Yes.
Okay. So it wasn't Marcus Aurelius died and suddenly everything went to pot.
Yeah.
Because there's a reason he was the last of the Stoics. Stoicism was in decline for a while. He just happened to be the last one.
Yep.
But logic lost its influence over a period, so that's just a convenient, like a bookend to talk about that period. But that period was really an exceptional period. There was tremendous progress. That's the period where the Roman that's where they built the Colosseum. They discovered concrete.
So beauty and architecture, progress, thriving communities, thriving society.
That's right. And tremendous science, advancement in science. Have you ever heard of the Antikythera mechanism?
No.
So an Antikythera mechanism is the world's first analog computer. Mm-hmm. It is thought now to have been invented by Archimedes, constructed in Archimedes' studio in Syracuse.
Right.
And it is an analog computer that calculates a bunch of astronomical events, solar eclipses, and it even.
And they were very accurate with that, right?
Very accurate, and it even calculated the ecliptical variation of the moon and the precession of the moon's axis.
Okay.
So that requires a knowledge of discrete mathematics.
It's so funny when we look at history and we think like we're so advanced, but there were people that were so intelligent.
Well, we are pretty advanced. We are pretty advanced, but the thing is, our advancements are almost entirely due to logic.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're in a period of decay. But
right.
So in the early 20th century is when we stopped teaching logic in
So
schools.
we need another boom period.
Well, we'll get it if we start teaching logic again.
That's what, yeah.
Yeah, but logic literacy started going downhill during the first half of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. In the second half of the 20th century, computers were invented.
Yep.
Okay, but computers don't decrease the value of logic literacy; they increase it.
Okay.
They increase it, and the fact that we have these amazing tools, computers, but logic literacy is going so far downhill.
Yep.
That's the source of a lot of problems.
Yes.
Computers we have the digital revolution because a young engineer named Claude Shannon, he was an engineering student, and while he was an undergraduate in engineering, he took a class in logic in the philosophy department.
Right.
He didn't have to take it. He was probably like me. Maybe had a friend that invited him. I don't know why.
Just decided to try it. Yeah.
But he suddenly put 2 and 2 together and said, we can use this logic to create digital circuits.
Yeah.
And boom, the information.
Another thriving period.
Was born. Yeah. And he said, in his own words, he said that I was the only one who understood both fields.
Okay.
There might have been others. Who knows? But maybe not. Maybe he really was the only engineer to take logic at that time. Now, his discovery of being able to use logic with electronics made computers possible.
Right.
Okay. But the engineers who built the first general purpose digital computer, general purpose programmable digital computer, which is the ENIAC,
Yeah.
they didn't have any training in logic. Okay, and what they built worked, but it was a logical mess.
Right.
Okay, that's a quote from there's a book called The Universal Computer.
Yeah.
That talks about this history. He says that the engineers that made it, it was an engineering marvel, but it was a logical mess.
Okay.
But then a fellow named John von Neumann came along. He was a logician, and he showed them how to clean up the logic.
Yes.
Okay? And so the von Neumann architecture has been very influential in computer science for a long time.
Okay.
Okay. But then when they made good computers, the pattern that I'm trying to show is that logic allows people to do amazing things.
Yep.
But they can't do those amazing things very well until they also learn logic.
Right.
So you have a guy that learned logic that made computers
You have these
possible.
periods where somebody comes in and fixes it, basically. But
Well, and that's true at every stage.
Yeah.
Digital electronics made computers possible. They were a mess until the people that made computers learned logic.
yeah.
Okay, that made computers could be programmed,
Yeah.
but programming was a mess until people that understand logic created programming languages. Like Grace Murray Hopper, she was a female Navy admiral, wrote the first computer languages.
Okay.
Computer language, and she was a mathematician who knew about logic.
Yeah.
Okay, and when programming languages were developed, people could create software for databases.
Okay.
Okay, and those were a mess until a guy that understood logic, named Ted Codd.
Yep.
He created what's called the relational model, and that made a huge improvement in databases. Okay,
Right.
but now databases are a huge mess.
Right. Right.
And they will continue to be a huge mess until the people that use them and design them also learn logic.
Okay.
So right now, databases are one of the biggest problems in the for any large organization.
Right.
There was an estimate that trillions of dollars are squandered every year on data quality.
Yeah.
Okay, and data quality. A lot of people think of data quality as being garbage in, garbage out, but that's only a small part of it. The biggest problem with data quality by far is that information is not organized in a way that allows people to use it the way they want to use it, and that's because the people that decide how it's going to be organized don't have any experience. They're not able to specify their requirements with precision.
Yes.
They use natural language to specify the requirements. And like we talked about earlier, when you have cultural mismatches,
Yep.
you're going to have misunderstandings.
So you need precise language.
That's right. And there are very few cultural mismatches that are more pronounced than the cultural differences between business people and IT people.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so
that's
when you have business people trying to explain their requirements to engineers, there's a lot of problems there. And
Yeah.
so the solution that we propose in the Center for Logic and Business Communication is for business schools to start teaching logic.
Right.
Okay? That way they will gain the capacity to express their requirements in terms of logic.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if they ever be able to come to do that, and I think they definitely will if we start teaching logic again.
Now, do you think tech guys, are they good at understanding logic?
No.
They're not either.
No.
It's not taught to
only
them.
a tiny percent are. In fact, most of the real advances in computer science, even today, are made by the few tiny handful of computer scientists that do understand logic. There's a fellow named, let's see, I don't mind. I don't think they'll mind if I mention their names.
Yeah.
There's guys like Leslie Lamport. He developed a program called TLA Plus,
Yeah.
which allows people to specify a software
Right.
in a way that's kind of like making a blueprint for a building.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's not widely used, only because you can't use it unless you learn logic.
Right.
Okay, and so the only place where that is being successfully used is in implementations where the engineers and the subject matter experts are the same people.
Okay.
They're the same people. They're people that have the requirement in their own head,
Right.
and they're able to express it using logic.
Okay.
That's there are places like Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Cosmos and a couple places. The ESA, the European Space Agency. There's a guy that wrote a paper about he made an operating system for a spacecraft, and just there's places like that. But it's not usable currently for general purpose because so few people are able to express their requirements precisely.
Right.
Now imagine business schools start teaching logic. Okay, business people, business analysts become capable of describing their business processes, their business workflows, and their requirements in precise terms. They give those terms to the engineers.
Yep.
They don't even have to have a conversation.
Right. So it's so precise. The precision
right.
is so good
Yeah.
that there's like zero room for mistake of miscommunication.
Well, that's right. Now that doesn't mean they won't make mistakes, but it means that mistakes can be addressed in a perfectly precise manner.
Right.
They can be identified. Testing can be automated.
Right.
Mistakes can be found mechanically.
Okay.
Okay.
So it seems like what if logic was more implemented in our society, in our schools, just in our culture right now, what things do you think would be better? What would happen? What would you see if you had to predict, like, what would happen in the world if we started teaching logic again and the things that you're fighting for right now? What would you expect to see, like a booming period for us? And
if we started teaching logic again, and the way that logic has been taught in the past might not be the perfect way that it was taught.
Right.
But if people started taking logic again, I would say that that within a generation we would see a reversal of the decline of all the declines we're seeing now. The decline of democracy.
Yep.
All around the world, democracy is in decline.
Yes. Trust in institutions would
That's
go
right.
back
Institutions, the rule of law.
Up. Yep.
Dynamism.
Because that's a big one. Is we have lost all faith in institutions for the most part.
Yeah. Now, in a lot of parts of the world, people have never learned logic. Okay, and a lot of the places that have achieved democracy, like for example, in India, they have some traditions of logic and reasoning, but they don't have any traditions of teaching logic. There have been some people have discovered that in their sutras, there have been logical theories that have been that can be put together, but nobody's going to notice that unless they read all these sutras. And there's no coherent way to discern knowledge of logic without more deep knowledge. So essentially, logic does not really have a tradition in India, although they did have some. They do have some, some seeds of it. But
now, what were the other things you were just saying?
Now, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, so India.
India is the world's largest democracy.
Yeah.
But it's not a highly functional democracy.
Right.
And democracy is in decline in India. And lots of other places have democracy as a result of the influence of the United States.
Right.
Okay, and our democracy is in decline.
And what do you think about ours why do you think ours is in decline?
Well, I think the root cause is a decline in logic literacy, which means a decline in a lot of things. The ability of people to ask good questions of their politicians. Right. A general decline of ethics.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. And an increase in the ability of large, influential companies and political
to manipulate
to manipulate and deceive.
Yep.
Okay, and
you think logic would help with all those things?
People. There's a great quote from a German, not German, it's British logician named Alfred North Whitehead. He said, "Logic brings freedom and above all boldness."
Yeah.
Okay, so his point, I think, was when people understand logic and they have confidence in their ability to reason and detect mistakes, It enables them and encourages them to do things and to discover things, and maybe the things that they think they discover are wrong, but they have the tools to eventually recognize that they're wrong.
Yeah.
And another thing, there's a well, let's see, we were talking about these different ages of logic literacy.
Yep, we had the first one you talked about, which was ended it with Marcus Aurelius dying.
That's right.
Yep.
And so the reason I bring that back up is because I was getting ready to explain something that would be easier to understand if we continued with that part of the discussion.
Right. Let's go back to that.
Okay. All right. So
we do this on here sometimes. Yeah, it just jumps all around. But
how's our time?
we're at about an hour right now, so
Okay.
you're good. You're
Great.
good. You got plenty of time. Take as much time as you want.
Okay.
Basically, we can wrap it up when you're ready to wrap it up.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So that first period ended in about the 3rd century AD.
Yep.
Okay, and the Roman Empire just continued in decline, basically nonstop. It just went in decline in the West. There was some resurgence in the East.
Yep.
So I mentioned that Christians continued to study logic, but they didn't have any political authority.
Yes,
Well,
that's what you said. Yep.
A couple hundred years later, the politicians converted to Constantine converted to Christianity.
Okay.
Okay, and then there were some signs of resurgence, or at least some signs of I don't want to say that the decay was stopped, but it leveled out.
Okay.
Okay. And then a fellow named Justinian, Emperor Justinian, he was kind of a wild man. He wanted to revive the greatness of the Roman Empire.
Okay.
So he tried to bring back Roman, the traditions of Roman law.
Yeah.
And he reconstructed the Hagia Sophia, which was this magnificent cathedral.
Yeah.
That still stand. It was a cathedral. Then it became a mosque when the Muslims sacked. They took over Constantinople, and but the problem with Justinian is that he banned logic. There was a fellow named Boethius, a philosopher named Boethius.
What was it that makes people ban logic?
He thought that logic was that all pagan philosophy was inconsistent with Christian doctrine.
Okay.
Now he didn't ban it completely. Okay, he allowed certain people, mainly in the medical school at Alexandria, to continue studying parts of logic.
So he lumped that in with like pagan stuff.
That's right. That's right. But the medical school at Alexandria, the great physician Galen said that you can't study medicine without logic. Logic is necessary to study medicine.
Which makes sense. Yeah.
And so when he banned logic, the medical professors in Alexandria said, well, we need to at least teach part of logic. So he can continue to allow them to study the first 7 chapters of Aristotle's Prior Analytics.
Okay.
And there may have been others that he allowed to teach logic. I don't know, but
so that was another period where it started getting better?
No, it could have been. There was a guy named Boethius who translated all of Aristotle's works on logic into Latin.
Okay.
And Latin was the vernacular language, the language that ordinary people spoke. At least most of it in the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire was mostly Greek, or it became more Greek. Okay. But anyhow, Boethius was execued. Okay. And Justinian banned logic.
Yep.
Okay. And a lot of historians say that was the last light put out in the Christian world for 500 years. Some people say 1,000, but that's not right. It was for 500 years. That was, we slid into the Dark Ages. That's when the Dark Ages began.
Okay.
It had been going downhill a lot before that, but that was like the final straw.
Right.
Okay. Now here's the thing. When he shut down the academy, the logic professors fled to the east.
Okay.
And they met the Shah. Okay.
Yeah.
And they didn't stay there long. They went there thinking that they were going to find a paradise led by philosopher kings, and they didn't. So they came back, but it's likely that they left some knowledge of logic behind with them. We don't have any evidence that they did, but they might have. But we do know that there were some Nestorian monks in Syria that had translated Aristotle's works on logic into Syriac.
Okay.
Okay, and Syria was where that was one of the first centers. That was very one of the first centers of Islam.
Yes.
The Umayyad dynasty was centered in Syria, and so we know that they had at least the beginnings of knowledge of logic.
Right.
Okay, and when the Abbasids, the Muslim, the Abbasid, they overthrew the Umayyad Empire. The Abbasids embraced logic. They established a house of wisdom in Baghdad, and they taught logic. They translated Aristotle's stuff from Greek into Arabic.
Yes.
And that started the golden age of Islam.
Okay.
And whereas science basically came to a complete stop in the Christian world, the Muslims became the most advanced people in the world. They
Right.
were highly advanced in.
So it was another boom in basically scientific.
That's right. This was the second great golden age of logic literacy. Was this golden age of Islam?
And it seems like with that each time comes like growth in knowledge.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Tremendous growth in knowledge.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So they had progress in mathematics, astronomy, optics, many branches of science. Okay.
Right.
But eventually, they started restricting logic
Okay.
to religion only.
Yes.
Okay, after a couple hundred years, beginning and around, I believe, the 11th century, beginning of the 11th century, they started saying that every cause is everything that happens is a result of the will of God, and that's it. If I light a piece of cotton on fire, it doesn't catch on fire because of a chemical reaction or because cotton is flammable. None of that matters. What matters is the will of God.
Okay, so that put a halt to learning a lot.
Well, it said essentially said that the only legitimate thing to use logic to reason about is the will of God. Okay.
Yeah.
And so science started going downhill. Now they had a 250-year tradition of logic, so that it didn't go downhill all the time, but it started going downhill,
Right.
and eventually collapsed. And so did their institutions, their political institutions started going downhill. They lost the diplomatic and military capacity to defend themselves, and then in 1258 they were just completely destroyed by Mongol hordes.
Right.
Okay. Now, fortunately, there were Muslims in Spain.
Yeah.
They were remnants of the Umayyad.
And they kept some of that knowledge?
Well, they didn't keep it, but they received it.
Okay.
Okay, they received knowledge of logic. The most influential person, I think, in the decline of logic in the Abbasid Empire was a guy named Al-Ghazali.
Okay.
He wrote a book called The Incoherence of the Philosophers. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Sounds like an interesting book, actually.
Okay. And then over in Spain, there was a fellow named Averroes, I think that was Averroes that wrote a book called The Incoherence of the Incoherence.
Okay.
Which means he was basically refuting the incoherence of the philosophers, saying that is incoherent.
So he was saying the book on how the philosophers were incoherent was actually incoherent.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so they were able to receive and preserve knowledge of logic in Spain, and they transferred it back to the Christians.
Okay.
Now this period of time, around I think that was starting around 10th or 11th century.
Yes.
I think.
All right, everybody, it is time to take a short break for our sponsors. The Nicky Free Podcast is now brought to you by Manscaped. They are the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Their products are precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped's Performance Package, the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. So join over 7 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for you. So it is 20% off and free shipping worldwide with the code NickyFit at manscaped.com. So the thing about it is, like, when you're, you're trying to shave your balls, you got like a date or something, you don't know where things are going to go, but you don't want to be like showing up all messy down there. You want to show up all clean. You want to be looking good down there. You know what I'm saying? So like, we've all done that. You get a shaver out, you go to shave yourself, and what happens every time? You cut your balls, man. And it's no good when you cut your balls. You start bleeding all over your ball sack. You got blood going everywhere. You get it cleaned up, you go on the date, and like obviously, you're a high performance male, so like things are going good for you in the date. Stuff starts going well, and next thing you know, like one thing leads to another. But then the thing is, you whip it out, and like there's a big thing, like your balls are all cut up, and it's like all sore down there, and it's like such a turn off, So it's like you don't want that to happen to you, Like you don't want a big open wound on your ball sack when you're out on a date, like. That's just no way to be. So check out the Performance Package 4.0 has arrived, and it is a game changer. So inside this package, you'll find the Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is right here. And look at these things, man. Manscaped's products are so aesthetically pleasing looking. Like the design on it, it looks like something that Batman would use. It's like so sleek. It's all black. It's just like aesthetically pleasing to look at. They've done such a good job. So this is the Lawnmower 4.0. The other thing that comes in the performance package is the Weed Whacker, nose hair and ear trimmer, because it's like, I see this all the time. You're talking to somebody and it's like they take care of themselves, they eat healthy, they work out, they're trying to look good and everything, but then it's like you look at their nose and it's a bunch of nose hair sticking out. Bro, take care of that. Like, why do you want to do that? Use the Weed Whacker nose and ear hair trimmer, because like clean that shit up, dude. Nobody wants to see that, man. Inside the package, you're also going to find the Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant, because you want your balls to smell good, the Crop Reviver Toner, and then also the Boxer Briefs that come with. And I'm probably going to take some scantily clad photos in these, because if you've seen my Instagram, the leaner I get, the more like scantily clad photos and videos I take. So I'm going to be rocking these Manscaped things, showing off the abs, trying to look sexy online. I'll be taking some videos in these. It also comes with the travel bag, so you can carry it all with you, so that when you're on the go, you got to be looking good when you're on the go. So let's talk a little bit about the Lawnmower 4.0. This trimmer is the future of grooming, and dare I say, the greatest ball hair trimmer ever. It's a 4th generation trimmer. It features cutting edge ceramic blades to reduce grooming accidents thanks to the advanced skin safe technology. The Lawnmower 4.0 is waterproof. It also has an LED spotlight, so when you're down there doing it, man, like you can see all the nooks and crannies. It got the spotlight on it, so you're not missing any spots or anything. Because it's waterproof, you can say goodbye to the mess on the bathroom floor. You can do it in the shower. You can, So guys, it's time to take care of yourself. All right, look at this. Look at this product. It's awesome. Thank you, Manscaped. This stuff is so great. They also threw in this beard hedger, which is just a great beard trimmer. We'll talk about that another time. But this is the performance package. So yeah, guys, go online, go to manscaped.com. If you want 20% off, use code NickyFit. You will get 20% off and free shipping worldwide. So check out the performance package. It's awesome. And thank you guys so much. Use code NickyFit. Save 20%. You're really helping out the podcast. And I want to say that I was already using Manscaped before they started sponsoring the podcast. I think they're a great product. So thank you guys for picking this stuff up. Use code NickyFit. Save 20% and free shipping. You're really helping me out. You're helping out the podcast. And thank you to Manscaped. And thank you guys. Go out there. Let's get cleaned up. Let's not go out there all messy and stuff. We got to look good. All right, guys. Thank you.
I think was what some people have called the ornament of the world. There's a Muslim lady wrote a book called the Ornament of the World, where she said that this is the first time ever where we have Christians and Jews and Muslims living in harmony.
Okay.
Now it wasn't perfect harmony. There were some revolts. There was some problems. But overall,
yeah,
it was tremendously harmonious. In fact, the Muslim leader of the dynasty in Spain, his number 2 man, the number 2 person in his leadership was a Jew. Mm-hmm. Okay, now imagine that today.
So that was really rare.
Well, it wasn't rare back then. I mean,
Okay.
even in Baghdad, before Baghdad was sacked by the Mongols, they had Christians and Jews that were leading some of their universities. They didn't care what their beliefs were.
Right.
They wanted to know if you're competent, if you're a good teacher, you come and teach at our school.
Well, that's how it should be.
Yeah. Now they're not going to have Christians and Jews teach in their madrasas, teach religion, obviously.
Right. Yes.
But they made a distinction, right? So this was a period where they embraced logic.
Yeah.
And they understood its limitations.
Okay.
Okay. When they lost sight of the limitations of logic, they started believing that logic justifies religion. Okay, and then they stopped using logic to reason about anything else.
Right.
Okay, but fortunately the Muslims in Spain were far enough away from Baghdad that they were not
They didn't get
assassins.
influenced by that.
That's
then.
right.
Okay.
That's right.
Yep.
However, they transferred knowledge of logic back to the Christians.
Which you said. Yep.
Yeah, and that led to in the 11th and 12th centuries a Renaissance. We don't call that the Renaissance. That's what we should call the Renaissance. The Renaissance started then. The other Renaissance should be called the Second Renaissance. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
Because they that's when the first universities were formed. They started translating Aristotle's books on logic. In the 11th century, I believe, and almost immediately they turned around. They started embracing science again. The first university was created in, I believe, the University of Bologna in 1088, I think.
Okay.
Now, so this would be the third. This is the beginning of the third golden era of logic literacy.
Yes.
It began when a logic teacher became pope.
Okay.
There's a guy named Gerbert of Aurillac.
Yes.
And he became pope. I believe it was Pope Sylvester the second. I can't
Sylvester.
remember.
That's a cool name.
One of the Pope Sylvesters, and he became pope. And shortly after that, I believe within what I want to say, but within 50 years or so, the first universities were formed in northern Italy.
Okay.
The first university, and then shortly after that, the University of Paris, and then Oxford or Cambridge. So universities.
So another boom.
Yeah, that's right. Another boom. Okay, and science came back to Europe. There was science. Also, the rule of law. Okay, that instead of being governed by the rule of will, imperial will, or tradition, they had the rule of law.
Okay.
Now, the rule of law is not something you can impose on people. It's something that people have to accept.
Right.
Like right now, if we go to to some corrupt place where corruption rules, you can't just say, okay, now we're going to have the rule of law. You can't say that.
Right.
It has to be something that they're prepared for, that they have the capacity for, and so it comes from within. Okay, and that happens in places that have strong traditions of logic education.
Okay.
And in 1300, during this third golden era, that's when the Magna Carta appeared.
Yep.
Okay, the Magna Carta is a famous document that limited the. It's not quite a constitution, but it has the appearance of a constitution.
I remember learning about that in school. Yeah.
Okay, so that happened during this period because the rule of law became reestablished in Europe. Okay, science, the rule of law, people were tolerant and peaceful for the most part. I mean, not perfectly peaceful, but compared.
But so with logic comes more tolerance, peace.
As long as people understand the limitations of logic.
Right.
That was the case in the early Abbasid Empire when they started ignoring the limitations of logic. That's when they started killing heretics. That's when they became more intolerant.
Yep.
That's when their scientific institutions started going downhill, and their decline was very pronounced. But then it became really pronounced when they got sacked by the Mongols.
Right.
That was one of the most bloody military sieges in history.
Okay.
Whereas the one in Rome, it was more gradual.
Yes.
More gradual.
Right.
Okay. All right. Okay. What's next? Okay. So why did the third one come to an end? Okay.
Yeah.
The third one came to an end. So it began when a logic teacher became pope.
Yes.
And it ended when the greatest logician of the Middle Ages was excommunicated. His name was William of Ockham.
Okay.
William of Ockham. He was a Franciscan monk or a friar. A friar is kind of like a monk that does not live in a monastery.
Right.
So he was a Franciscan friar, and he was concerned. He was a logician.
Yes.
And he was a friar. So he liked religion. He liked logic. He didn't have a problem reasoning about religion with logic.
Right.
But he did have a problem basing religious doctrines and conclusions on logic. He said we cannot justify religion with logic, because that's harmful to Christian fellowship.
Okay.
Okay, and he believed that spiritual authority and worldly authority should be separate.
Okay.
Okay, and he objected to some of the things that the Pope at that time said.
So he was the downfall of it because of this thought?
Well, he was a very important figure in the history of logic. He eventually became a very good influence. But during his day,
okay,
he provoked a massive authoritarian backlash.
Okay.
Okay, a huge authoritarian backlash. He called the Pope a heretic.
Yeah.
Okay? He was excommunicated, and he fled to the Holy Roman Empire, where they saved him, they protected him, defended him against the Pope. But he started after he did this, the universities in Europe became obsessed with these debates over religious authority,
okay,
and religious doctrine. Okay, he was essentially saying that logic does not justify religion, which is the opposite of what Al-Ghazali said.
Yeah.
Okay, Al-Ghazali said that we should only use logic to justify Islam. That's the only legitimate use of logic.
Right.
Okay.
But wasn't that a downfall of it too then?
That's what I believe led to the downfall of the
right
of the golden age of Islam.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So William of Ockham said exactly the opposite. He said, "Do not use logic to justify Christianity. Instead, use faith and Scripture to justify humanity."
So he wanted to keep them separate more.
Well, yes, that does not mean he applied logical reasoning about Christianity, but he didn't believe it was that you could justify Christianity through logic.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Do you remember when I said the most important thing to understand about logic? Okay, it's that simple example I gave. If A implies B, we know for certainty that if A is true, then B is true.
Right.
But logic cannot tell us whether A really does imply B, or if A really is true. Failure to understand that, to you, I think, to people hearing that seems self-evident, and I hope it does.
Yep.
But that is one of the most abused concepts ever. People ignore that. They deny it. They say, yes, logic does justify Islam. Logic does justify Christianity.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the failure to make that distinction is a tremendous source of authoritarianism.
Okay.
And violence and orthodoxy.
Yes.
Okay. And so Europe fell into the grips of authoritarianism for 250 years, at least, I think.
Oh, shit.
And science came to a halt. Okay, during that time, there was only, I think, one major scientific discovery, and I think that was Copernicus.
Yep.
Okay, between a guy named Nicole Oresme and Galileo, I think the only major discovery in science was Copernicus, and that's it.
Yep. And what did Copernicus discover?
He had a theory that the sun was the center of the solar system.
He's the one that changed our opinion of that.
Yes, Galileo, I think, did I'm not so sharp in my astronomy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but
no, me neither. That's why I'm like asking you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but
it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Now that period, science was in decline.
Yeah.
The universities were in the grips of there's no science. They're in the grips of these authoritarian dogmas, and that's when all these things that people associate with the negativity of religion happened.
Okay.
The Spanish
It's the
Inquisition,
authoritarian type. That's
the Spanish Inquisition, the expulsion of the Jews.
Right.
The condemnation of Galileo.
Yes.
And it wasn't just the state that was authoritarian. It was the whole culture became authoritarian.
Right.
So I'd say the 100 Years' War.
Yeah.
Which was about.
I remember reading
the
about
succession. That. The royal succession of some kingdom. And the 30 Years' War, which was about religion.
Right.
But all these things that happened in this period, most of which people blame on religion, really is a result of these bad ideologies about logic.
Okay.
And so you have these different periods where people were Christian here, Christian there. They believed the same things, but there's this massive change of character of their civilization. Why? Their religion didn't change. Their ideologies about logic changed.
Okay.
Okay, so we shouldn't blame that on religion, even though it's very easy to.
Well, I was going to say there's those negative parts of religion are always the scary ones. The authoritarianism, the using it to justify hating and killing other people. But then there's I have so many friends who are very religious, and there's such a positive thing they get from it.
Right, and here's further evidence that those things are not a result of religion, but rather as a result of ideologies about logic.
Okay.
Okay, those same things were even worse.
Yeah.
When the atheist Soviets adopted the same or similar ideologies about logic.
Right, and so the authoritarianism came along with that, even in an atheist.
That's right. Authoritarianism.
So the lack of logic is where that usually comes in, or misusing logic. I should say.
The free teaching and uses of logic is 100% incompatible with authoritarianism. Totally incompatible. Authoritarians will not let you teach logic, or if they do, they're going to hijack it and say that we can only use it.
That makes total sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we just covered the third.
The third, yes.
Golden age of logic literacy. Okay.
And so it was the misuse of it that started making it go downhill, right? Led to authoritarianism.
William of Ockham.
Yes.
Provoked a huge authoritarian backlash by saying that
they should not be used. It shouldn't be used to justify religion.
That's right. Now, it might have happened even without William of Ockham. It might have happened in a similar way that it happened in the Muslim world. It might have happened, but he provoked it, and it happened just like that.
Just like that, fast.
Yeah.
Okay.
And another thing. Here's another thing. There's all kinds of other overlapping patterns here.
Yeah.
And one of them is plague and disease, pandemics.
Yeah.
Okay? I learned this. I was making a timeline of all these the historical knickknacks about logic.
Yeah.
And I saw this article somewhere that had this chart of major pandemics.
Yeah.
Okay. And every single one of the big ones, the ones that killed major percentages, happened very shortly after a change in ideology about logic. Okay, and there was one that didn't, and that was in China.
Yeah.
And China was already very authoritarian, and they rejected a philosophy that could have led to embracement of logic. Okay. And so every single one of those, like the first one was the plague of Justinian.
Yep.
Okay, that happened in Constantinople. A major plague in Justinian happened within 10 years of Justinian banning logic. Okay? Right. Then the Black Plague happened within a similar amount of time after William of Ockham's excommunication.
Right.
Okay. Now, is this just a coincidence? Maybe, but think about this. We know that your mental state has a huge impact on your health, right?
Right.
And so, would that apply to a whole society? If you take a whole society and put it under the boot of authoritarianism.
Right, if everybody's already in a weakened state, and then something that maybe we can usually handle fine.
That's right.
Yeah.
So now everybody knows that the Black Plague was caused by what? I don't know, rats or something. Okay, but rats there's nothing new about rats. They had rats before that, right?
Right.
And there was disease.
But if you're in a weakened state,
but if you have a whole society under the grips of this authoritarian dogma, and also the Spanish flu was one of the biggest.
Right.
That happened in the 20th century. Shortly after.
Is this the one we haven't talked about yet?
This one we haven't talked about yet.
Yep.
Okay. So now let's talk about the
fourth golden age, basically.
Okay, that began with a fellow named Petrus Ramus.
Yep, and I think you mentioned his name earlier.
Yeah. So now Petrus Ramus, I think, is probably the most important person in history that people don't know about.
Right.
He's one of the most important altogether, most important, period.
But he's not well known.
No, nobody. Have you ever heard of Petrus Ramus before?
Not before you said it. No.
Nobody has.
No.
Okay. All right, and the people that do are mostly education scholars that talk about his attitudes towards curriculum and things like that. Mm-hmm. But he was important because he well, let me back up a little bit. So,
yes.
With William of Ockham, the tradition that he was trained in was called scholasticism.
Okay.
Scholasticism is the tradition of basically combining logic education with religion, and the idea that logic justifies religion.
Okay.
Okay, that's. I mean, it's more nuanced than that, but I think that suffices. I think for a basic understanding.
Yes.
Okay. Now, that was a tremendously good thing at first, because it was scholasticism, that idea that logic was not only so Justinian bad logic, because he said it was incompatible with Christian doctrine.
Right.
So the scholastics, they made the case that not only is logic not incompatible, it is actually part of Christian doctrine.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
And that idea was what led them to re-embrace logic and science and start universities.
Yep.
Okay. So there's the good, the bad, and the ugly of scholasticism. The good is that it brought logic back to the Christian West. The bad is that once somebody challenged it, okay, William of Ockham challenged it, it led to a massive authoritarian backlash.
Yeah.
And the ugly is all those things that happened as a result. The Spanish Inquisition, the condemnation of Galileo, the expulsion of Jews, all that.
Yep.
Okay,
Terrible
all that violence,
stuff.
terrible stuff. Okay, now Ramus, he is not famous as a logician, and he really didn't contribute anything new to the subject matter of logic. What he did was teach people that logic and rhetoric is the tradition of using persuasive speech, and he said those things are separate. So rhetoric was an important part of scholasticism. And so Ramus basically said, hey, we can use logic to reason about other things. Okay.
Yeah.
He didn't use those words, but that was the effect. That was the effect of what he was trying to say. He was trying to separate logic from religious doctrine. He was a religious man. He didn't have anything against using logic to reason about religion, but he objected to the idea that logic justifies religion.
Okay.
He was an anti-scholastic.
So this has been going on with religion
For a long
numerous
time.
times.
Yeah, numerous times. Now, Ramus, he was by far the most famous person during his day, I believe the 1500s.
Okay.
He's also the most controversial by far. Okay.
And what was controversial about him?
Well, he challenged the orthodoxy of the entire establishment of Europe.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
so very controversial.
A lot of people hated it, and plus in France, it didn't help that he became a Protestant. And he was eventually he had his head chopped off during the St. Bartholomew Days massacre.
Holy shit!
But he was enormously influential in England, in Scotland, in Germany, and in the northern colonies of the United States.
Okay.
Okay. The Puritans learned about Ramus from John Milton. You ever heard of John Milton? He's a famous Renaissance poet. He wrote Paradise Lost.
I have heard of that.
Yeah, he lived about the same time as Shakespeare, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
So John Milton actually taught the Puritans about Ramus.
Right.
Okay. The Puritan pilgrims, the pilgrims came over, and they had books by Ramus on the Mayflower. Okay, so a lot of people do not distinguish between the Puritans and the Pilgrims.
Right.
And if you don't have a reason to make the distinction, then there is no distinction. But if you recognize important differences, there is a reason, and I make that distinction. The Pilgrims, they were the first that established the colony in Massachusetts.
Yep.
And they respected they established they had the Mayflower Compact, which was a kind of a constitution. It was a written document that established their government, and they respected half of the passengers of the Mayflower were not religious.
Right.
Okay. The Pilgrims called themselves saints, and the non-pilgrims they called strangers, but they were kind to them. They did not force them to join their religion.
Right.
The Pilgrim, they could have. They controlled the militia. They could have said, "You join us or else," but they didn't. They didn't. They were tolerant. They believed in the separation of church and state.
Yes.
Okay. The Puritans, okay, who a number of decades later established the Plymouth Bay Colony.
Yeah.
They did not respect the difference between church and state. They established a theocracy. Okay, But they were also Ramists. They were also followers of Ramists, and they established Harvard University,
Yeah.
essentially to teach Ramist logic.
Okay.
Now, but here's the interesting thing about Ramism, or that ideology about logic, which separates the when you explicitly separate logic from ontology or from rhetoric. You say that they're different.
Yes.
You recognize that they're different, and you respect that difference. Okay, that leads not only to all the benefits that we talked about before,
Yep.
but apparently it also led to a very unusual and new thing, which is the willingness to change one's own principles as a result of experience. Okay?
Yes.
And you, I don't know of any other time in history, any other people where you see this phenomenon, other than the places that embraced Ramism, which includes the northern colonies of the United States, England, Scotland, and Germany.
Right.
Okay, so evidence of that in the northern colonies of the United States was that you have these the Puritans. They had a theocracy, but then they stopped having a theocracy. They burned witches, okay, but then they stopped burning witches. Okay, they were not perfect examples of the best people. They were
No.
okay, but they were willing to change as a result of experience.
Yes.
Okay, and so they adopted they assimilated the Massachusetts Bay Colony. That became they assimilated the Plymouth Colony into the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Right.
And they adopted their attitudes towards the separation of church and state.
Well, and that's something I respect in people in general, is their ability to take in new information and change their mind.
But that doesn't happen very often with a lot of groups.
It doesn't, but it's something we should all do more.
And that tradition where you see that and respect that is due to our traditions, our Ramist tradition. So even though traditions and institutions are durable, they last a long time. So even though we don't teach logic anymore, a lot of the traditions that were established as a result of previous ideologies about logic, they will survive a long time. They can't survive forever.
Yeah.
They can't survive forever, but they do survive for a long time now. But now we're seeing even our core institutions, our core respect for the rule of law, those things are going downhill.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but let me go back to the history a little bit. So a guy named who was the fellow that wrote the Democracy in America? Was that Alexis de Tocqueville?
Okay.
Alexis de Tocqueville. He came to America and he noticed a huge difference between the North and the South.
Yes.
A huge difference. Okay. He said the North, that they are dynamic. They are economically vibrant.
Yes.
Okay. They love freedom. But in the South, even though they had the same constitution, even though they're the same culture, okay, they're for the most part white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They're Protestants. They're whites. They're mostly from Western Europe.
Yeah.
But he struggled to explain why this drastic, vast difference between the North and the South.
Right.
Okay. And
that eventually led to a civil war. Right?
He said it's slavery. Only slavery can account for this.
Yeah.
Okay, and people believe that, and people still believe that.
Right.
But big problem with that.
People in the North had slaves.
Massachusetts also had slavery. In fact, Massachusetts made slavery legal before Virginia. Now, they didn't practice slavery before Virginia. They were the place that had the first slaves, I think.
Right.
Okay, but they didn't make it legal.
Yes.
They didn't think they had to make it legal because the rule of law meant less to them. They just did it because they wanted to do it. They didn't feel the need to make it legal.
Right.
Why make it legal? Just do it. We have the authority. We have the power. Let's just do it.
They had the power, so they did.
That's right. In Massachusetts, okay, slavery was much less common. Okay, but they had respect for the rule of law, and
so if we're going to do this,
we have to do it. We got to make it legal. It was reprehensible to most of the people, but they didn't have the political power to stop it. Okay, and so if they're going to do it, we better make it legal. So they were the first to make it legal, and they were the first to make it illegal.
Right.
Another example of their willingness to change as a result of experience. Okay, they're willing to change their first principles. Okay, maybe not their first principles, but deeply held principles. They changed as a result of experience.
Right.
Okay, and the numerous examples of that. Okay, and that cannot. So what de Tocqueville attributed to slavery cannot be attributed to slavery, because every single northern state
Had some slavery.
slaves. Okay,
Yeah.
every one of them. And de Tocqueville mentioned the Ohio Valley. Okay, where there was a river where on the north of the river was the north, and the south of the river was the south.
And there was such a difference.
And in the same valley, you'd think that there would be the same communities.
Right.
Okay, but no, there's huge difference. The people in the South, there was way more violence. There was more. They were lazy. They didn't have a good work ethic, and it was totally different.
Just different.
Yeah, totally different. And even though the South had the same constitution, it was essentially an authoritarian police state. There was no freedom of the press. Mm-hmm. And the Constitution really didn't mean anything in the South
at that point. Yeah,
that's right. And at that point, so.
But you said that was so the North had adopted some of this guy's teachings.
Oh, very, very much. And now Ramus was very influential at Harvard. After that, what's called Cartesian logic. So you probably heard of René Descartes. Mm-hmm. He basically he was not a logician.
Yep.
But there was a book called Port Royal Logic that was written by people that were deeply influenced by Descartes. Mm-hmm. And so they call Port Royal Logic, people refer to that as Cartesian logic, even though Descartes didn't write it. Descartes was not a logician, but it was written by logicians who were influenced by Descartes.
Yes.
Now, there were some differences, but not in logic. The logic was essentially the same, because and by that I mean they both emphasize the distinction between logic and ontology, or logic and rhetoric. They emphasize that distinction. The ways that they're different, I don't think are significant. They're significant to some historians and people who study those things. And by the way, if you want to know what those are, and if your listeners are curious, I'll basically explain that. And like I said, it's not.
Let's do it.
So the difference was basically in what they call method. Mm-hmm. Ramus' method. His way of analyzing things was to break everything into twos, into dichotomies. He said that all living creatures are either humans or non-human. He didn't say this. This is an example. Humans
that's
are
an
non-humans.
example of a dichotomy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And among all the things that are non-humans, he creates another dichotomy. They're either mammals or non-mammals. And all the things that are non-mammals, they're either vertebrates or invertebrates. You see what I'm saying? It's breaking things down and making a tree. Okay?
Right.
And at the time, people were fascinated by that. That's what helped people start to learn that they could use reasoning and logic to reason about other things other than religion. Mm-hmm. And this is a new tool to learn about the world.
Right.
Now the Port Royalists, what ended up being called the Cartesian folks, they said, that's too simplistic. These dichotomies are too simplistic. Oh, but by the way, that was essentially a preview of digital. That's B-tree information processing right there. So he was way ahead of his time as far as that goes, right?
Right.
Okay, but the Port Royalists thought that was too simplistic, and they kind of went back to something similar to Aristotle's categories. Aristotle wrote a book called Categories, where he said everything falls into 10 categories. It's either this, or that. I forget what they all are.
Yeah.
Anyhow, the Cartesian folks said, I think they had 18 categories. Okay, so their attitudes about logic were the same. Their methods of describing the world, those were
two different methods.
Yes. Now, some people think that's significant. I don't. I don't. I think as long as you're teaching logic, let people come up with their own methods of describing the world.
So if you're doing dichotomies or you're doing 18 different whatever.
Do whatever works for you. Whatever works for you. So method, people have been obsessed with method. They say we have to find the right method. Okay, and we can't make progress without the right method. I say no. Use whatever method works, whatever method comes to mind. Experiment with different methods. As long as we're teaching logic and we understand that logic does not justify anything, use whatever method works. So in that sense, the Cartesian logic was the same, and Cartesian logic was very popular in the other universities, Yale and the other
bigger universities.
And I mention that because I say that Ramism was so influential. Others will say, "Oh no, only Harvard liked." But Ramus was deeply influential to the Cartesian. It was deep. He was the one that put that in motion. And so even though people eventually rejected his method, his ideology about logic is what endured, and that's what gave us the Enlightenment. That's what started this fourth period of this fourth golden age of logic literacy.
Okay. And when was this?
This was Ramus lived. I believe he was born. I think 1515. I think.
Yeah.
I need to get my dates, but if I'm going to be.
And then when did that go from when to when? Okay, so that was another booming period.
Okay, yeah, that gave us the Enlightenment.
That leads us into modern times.
That's
basically.
right. That's right.
Yeah.
But I guess the next question is what happened next.
Yeah, kind of. And then when did it start to decline in your opinion? And so we're in decline now, is what you're saying.
We are in decline now. Now, different places started the decline at different times, but it all had the same root origin.
Yes.
I think. Okay. So, in the early, or the mid 1800s, there were some discoveries about geometry.
Yep.
Okay. That kind of threw a wrench into the attitude that geometry was this example of absolute truth. Okay?
Right.
Geometry had been, like I said, we talked about geometry being very influential for thousands of years. But in the early 18th century, a couple of guys working independently discovered contradictions in geometry.
Yes.
Okay, so and that was the beginnings of what's called non-Euclidean geometry. Euclid was a guy in Alexandria that wrote a book called The Elements, which is the most popular textbook ever printed. It was still in use up into the 1900s. It was used for 2,000 years or more.
Right.
Okay, but then they discovered this and so the Euclidean geometry is about geometry. That's the geometry that I learned in school. Plus some things that Descartes added. Descartes was the one that came up with using graphs.
Yeah.
Okay,
we did a lot of graphs.
Okay,
yes.
but you can do a lot of proofs without that. Okay, so Euclidean geometry included proofs. So did the Cartesian. But the point is that they discovered contradictions in geometry. So, for example, in geometry, one truth of flat plane geometry that we learned in high school is that two right angles make what is it? Two right angles make if you bisect a line.
Well, right angle.
Yeah. If you bisect a line with a perpendicular line, you get two right angles.
Yep.
Okay.
100%.
And another one is that all the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees.
Yes.
Okay. Now, non-Euclidean geometry introduces the idea of curved space geometry. Geometry on a curved space. Okay.
So does that have to do with like space-time and gravity?
No, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
So on a globe, a straight line is something called a great circle. Right?
Okay, so now just a quick sidebar, have you ever seen that video where there's these guys that believe in flat Earth and they're trying to prove their point, and so they set up this experiment with basically it's these walls, and then they measured holes in these walls at the exact same height over a long period of time, and they shine this light, like laser through it or light through it, and they're thinking it's going to be a straight line, and it doesn't go through the thing because obviously the Earth curves. And it's just a funny moment where they're actually disproving their own theory in real time, and they're just speechless. Like the guy's like, "Can you put the light up a little bit?" And he lifts it up, and then it shines through, and it's like, "Oh, we basically just proved ourselves wrong."
Yeah, that's funny,
dude. I'll send you that video. It's hilarious, but it's kind of what you're just talking about in a sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't remember what it was you just said that sparked that. Probably.
Okay,
you said curved on a globe, a line. Yeah.
So in flat geometry. Okay, there's what we call a parallel postulate that describes parallel lines.
Yes.
And it says that if you have a line and a point above that line, there's exactly one line through that point that is parallel to the first line, and that's it. Okay. On a globe though, there are no parallel lines. All lines intersect. Now, if you look at a globe, there are parallel what we call lines of latitude.
Yes.
But those are not really lines. Those are. They're not lines because they're not the shortest distance between 2 points.
Right.
Okay. That's why when you flatten a globe out, those lines of latitude are curved. They become curved.
Yes.
Okay.
You've all seen that on a flat map before. Yeah.
Okay. Now this discovery about non-Euclidean geometry caused a massive philosophical disruption.
Okay.
Okay, people were said that this concept of absolute truth, of knowing things for certain, is out the window. We no longer have any notion of absolute truth. Now all truth is relative. Okay, if you have flat surface and you have a curved surface, there are things that are true that contradict each other. So in logic, if you are doing problems in logic, a contradiction is a contradiction can't be true.
Right. Right.
But here we have contradictions of things that are true within their own system.
Yes.
So now the ethos about absolute truth changed. It says now you have to ask true, but true in what system? So you can have things that contradict. One thing is true in this system, this is true in that system, but they contradict each other.
Yes.
So the idea of absolute truth went out the window at that time.
Yes.
And that caused a huge philosophical shift. This is about the time, you ever read Alice in Wonderland or heard about Alice in Wonderland?
Okay. Yeah. I remember it.
So the guy that wrote that is actually a mathematician named Charles Dodson.
Okay.
Dodson. Okay. And Alice in Wonderland is an allegory of this strange new world where nothing is as it seems. Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So even one of the guys that invented that discovered non-Euclidean geometry. I gotta read some of these to you. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Look it up. Yeah, I remember Alice in Wonderland. Like, the doorway, like, they get small and then big. You take the pill to get big or small, and everything's kind of in a dream sequence, or like. So like really nothing's real there. Nothing is.
That's right. And Dodson also wrote a book called Euclid and His Modern Rivals. Mm-hmm. And he was trying to say that even though we have non-Euclidean geometry, Euclidean geometry, teaching that still has tremendous value.
Right.
And he tried to get people to continue to teach it.
Yes.
But that he was pretty much non-successful. I mean, we still retain it to a little bit. Retain it a little bit. You learned geometric proofs in high school.
Oh yeah.
But that training is nowhere near the level of training that people had received in geometric proofs before that. Yeah, before that, every educated person had to go through all of Euclid's elements and do all that stuff, and it was a much more intense. And when non-Euclidean geometry was discovered, wow, let's just do away with all that.
Just toss it out.
Yeah. Okay. So I gotta find this quote for you.
Yep. Okay. Take your time, man. Now this is all like super interesting stuff, honestly.
Okay. So one of the guys that
and so is this what you're saying is started kind of the decline?
That was the beginning of the origins of the decline.
Okay.
But like I said, the decline happened at very different
periods and
different rates in different places.
Okay.
It was much slower in the United States because of our deep traditions of Ramus that Ramus left for us.
So the Ramus stuff in the north that we were talking about.
Yeah, but after the Civil War,
it all kind of spread.
It never went away. We still have.
It's still here in a sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely still here. But we have.
But it's in decline, is what you're saying.
Everything's
which is what you're fighting for. That we need to start teaching it again.
That's right.
And it will improve our culture and society.
Okay, so there was a mathematician who his father was trying to work on proving that the parallel postulate that the guy discovered did not hold in non-Euclidean geometry. Okay, for a very long time, mathematicians wanted to say that this parallel postulate really isn't a postulate. We can prove it using other of Euclid's ideas, of other postulates.
Yeah.
Okay, and people spent a lot of time trying to prove that. And this mathematician told his son, "Don't do that, because if you do that, it will ruin your life." Okay.
Okay.
it'll and
it's going to blow your mind.
Yeah, he said, "Do not waste an hour's time on that problem. It does not lead to any result. Instead, it will come to poison your life. I believe that I myself have investigated all conceivable ideas in this connection." Now, he wrote a letter where he uses even stronger language than that, and I wish I could find that. But anyhow, his son actually,
how much time did he spend on this? That it was driving
his dad spent his whole life. But his son, he did not discover what his father was trying to discover, but in his efforts to discover it, he learned about this new kind of geometry where the parallel postulate, we ignore it. So he didn't. So instead of showing that the parallel postulate could be proved using other postulates, he just discarded the parallel postulate altogether. And in doing that, he said, "I have discovered a strange new world." He said, "I've discovered things so wonderful, I was astounded, and it would be an everlasting pity if these things were lost. When you, my dear father, see them, you will understand. All I say at present is out of nothing. I have created a strange new world. All I have sent you previously is like a house of cards in comparison with a tower." Okay, so this is just a glimpse into the major philosophical shift that happened with this discovery. Okay, and that's what Dodgson wrote Alice in Wonderland to kind of reflect this everything. We're just down a rabbit hole. Everything we thought was true.
Right.
Yeah. Now.
So this was mind-blowing stuff when they discovered it.
Yeah, that's right. Now.
Okay.
And it was very useful. So now we have, as a result of that, a way of thinking called model thinking. We think of things in terms of models.
Right.
We can create models of something.
They can predict things in the real world.
If a model's good, it can predict things in the real world.
Closely, but not always accurate.
But the thing is that people can abuse models. They can create models that don't predict anything in the world.
Right.
And they say, "Oh, this is a model, therefore it must be true because I say it's a model."
Or they can probably use models to make it say whatever they want it to
That's
say.
right. And
which is what I was talking about earlier.
Right. And if people don't understand the nature of models, again, this is that simple distinction between logic and ontology. Logic doesn't justify anything. So this is a way to abuse models.
Abuse it. Yeah.
Because people don't understand logic, they can say, "Oh, logic justifies this model."
Yeah.
And people who don't understand logic say, "Oh, yeah, okay, this model says this, we better believe that."
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's how you people use that all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And that's another reason. So when we talked about the science taking a turn towards darkness.
Yes.
Ideologies about logic are affect that in multiple ways. The first is the decline of ethics. Another is the abuse of models.
Right.
Okay, models are super useful.
Yeah.
But they're super easy to abuse if people don't understand.
Yes.
Logic. Now you don't have to. So if you don't distinguish between logic and ontology, logic becomes massively complex, bewildering. Nobody can learn all of it. If you do make that distinction, logic becomes simple. Logic is simple concepts that never change. They're the same for everybody. You can learn them. You can learn them in an hour. You can master them in a couple of weeks.
Right.
Okay. They don't come naturally, and it's easy to make mistakes unless you have some practice and repetition.
Yes.
But within a couple of weeks of study, people can get a handle of it.
Right, and before you go, we're going to give people that free class you were talking about, like where they could find that.
Oh, okay, Stanford has this
online course.
Yeah, just do a search for Stanford Intro Logic.
Yep.
Stanford Intro Logic, and
so search Stanford Intro Logic, and you can find a free course.
That's right. It's a free course. Now that course is designed to be taught by a live instructor.
Right.
But research has shown that people who take a logic class that benefit the most are people that have had prior exposure to the material.
Okay.
Okay. So if people want to take a look at that course, by all means, take a look at it. Maybe even go through it. But I wouldn't get too deep into things like the proofs or things like that unless you have a teacher
experience
that can help you, because if you make mistakes, it's sometimes hard to detect. You can't detect your own mistakes a lot. So
right.
But there's nothing wrong with becoming familiar with them, at least seeing what the subject matter is all about.
Right.
And such. And so anyhow, a couple other facts. I guess we've got to wind down here pretty quick, right?
Well, and no, we got plenty of time. It's up to you.
So I want to talk about the decay. The decay happened at different times in different places.
And that's going to lead us into the current.
That's right.
What's going on now?
The most rapid decay probably happened in Russia.
Okay.
In 1850, Tsar Nicholas I banned logic for any purpose other than religion. And he actually said, you cannot teach philosophy or logic anywhere except in theology departments.
Okay.
Okay. And and then the Soviets took over and they banned religion. Okay, so
Yeah.
they don't have a good track record when it comes to logic education. Now, some people will say, well, what about all that Soviet technology? After the World War II, they had tremendous technology. They made fighter jets and nuclear bombs.
Right.
Well, they had this program called I think it was called Operation Soviet-Him, I think, where they got a bunch of German engineers, like thousands of German engineers, and brought them to Russia or the Soviet Union.
They stole the knowledge, basically.
Well, we did the same thing.
Yeah.
We took all these super brilliant German scientists. And
Yes.
that's actually Werner von Braun. He was the main leader of the Apollo program.
Right.
Okay, and they got a bunch of German engineers, and so the fact that they had some scientific progress is not evidence of their innate capabilities. It was
They got the right people.
that's right. They got the right people, but they started going downhill, and they had here's a way how that ideology about logic influenced politics.
Yes.
Is the Soviet doctrine called what's it called? It's called all these words that I think about and write about often that just slip my mind.
That happens all the time, man.
Dialectical materialism.
Okay.
There's this philosophy called dialectical materialism that tries to have the appearance of logic literacy,
Right.
but without the foundation of logic education. They rejected logic education, except for possibly in some technical schools. Possibly, I don't know. But that was their official doctrine was dialectical materialism, which was something that appeared to be a logical, rational basis for governing, but was totally devoid of actual knowledge of logic, and it substituted. It was essentially the same as what the late Abbasid Muslims and the middle-aged Christians did with religion, but they just did it with the same thing, but without religion.
Okay.
They established these doctrines, and they tried to convince people that they were justified with logic. And a lady that wrote a book, her name is Hannah Arendt. She's written a lot about totalitarianism, and she said that she talked about the brutality of their logicism, or I think that was a term that she used, where she said that they would make the claim that you can't say that A is true without accepting B, and then you can't say that is true without accepting C, all the way down the murderous alphabet.
Right.
Okay,
right.
and that's what they did. They would use reason and
to justify doing terrible things.
To justify doing terrible things.
Okay.
And that has led to a lot of modern people, including some respected philosophers and such, to use that as an evidence against logic. We can't teach logic because it leads to things like that. No.
So it was the abuse of logic.
It was so they not only did not teach logic, they withheld logic education. They abused it and they ignored the distinctions. So that is the most destructive ideology. There have been similar ideologies where during the Scholastic period, they denied the distinction, but at least they taught logic.
Yes.
Okay. In the Soviet period, they denied the distinction, and they stripped people of their ability to make any sense of it or to oppose it by not teaching logic. So that's the worst of all, and that's the modern ideology. That's the ideology that is spreading across the world today, everywhere. That's the ideology that we are moving towards.
Right.
We have resisted it way longer than the Russians and Soviets and the Chinese, because of our institutions.
But we're moving towards that now.
We are moving towards that, and it will continue to happen.
And that's going more towards authoritarianism?
Authoritarianism is on the increase everywhere, not just in the government, but even in our culture, in society.
Yes.
People that you meet, I'm not saying that among friendships, but certainly among acquaintances and in organizations.
Oh, I have friends that are kind of authoritarian.
Yeah, and authoritarianism essentially
they don't think they are, but they are.
It's just a loss of tolerance, a loss of willingness to allow people their own free, their own.
I always question them, because I'm like, now imagine if the person that believed in the exact opposite of what you believe in comes into power and does the same thing to you.
Yeah.
And that's where I always have a problem with it. It's like, it all seems so great to just like impose your will and become authoritarian when it's like somebody's in charge that's saying the things you believe in. But now what happens when somebody that has the opposite beliefs gets in charge and uses that same You can't do that to people.
That's
you
right.
know?
But that happens when you have the rule of will instead of the rule of law.
Yeah.
And like I said, the rule of law cannot be imposed. You can't go to a place where people are authoritarian and say, okay, we're going
We have to
the rule
agree
of law.
on it. Yeah.
It has to come from
It has to
within.
start with basic stuff like, hey, we shouldn't kill people.
Well,
we can both agree.
Yes, but even more basic than that, it has.
Yeah.
I believe so. Logic is fundamental to a lot of things. It's fundamental to mathematics. It's fundamental to many of the sciences. It's fundamental to computers.
Yes.
Logic is absolutely fundamental. I argue that ideologies about logic are fundamental to other ideologies.
Okay.
Okay. So the simple example I gave you, if A implies B, and A is true, then we know that B is true. But logic cannot tell us if A. So that distinction.
Right.
If you ignore that distinction, that goes to the very basis of your attitude towards truth and authority.
Right.
So your ideologies about logic are fundamental to the ideologies we form about other things, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the distinction you're trying to make. So the people that ban logic or don't like it, they're not making that distinction.
That's right. And they don't want other people to be able to make that distinction either.
Okay.
But the antidote, and unfortunately, a lot of people say that the solution to that is to stop teaching logic. Like, for example, people that think that logic is the reason for that abuse.
Right.
Okay. And in the Scholastic period, it was they continued to teach logic, and they still had those abuses.
Yes.
So teaching logic alone does not solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, teaching logic and acknowledging that simple difference, the simple distinction. You have to understand that distinction. You have to acknowledge that logic alone does not justify anything.
Right.
Okay, but that I think is the antidote to.
So if you could design the world how you wanted to, what would you like to see happen?
I think that the primary foreign policy objective of the United States and every other modern advanced country should be helping other. First of all, internally, they should have a domestic policy to start teaching logic again.
Yes.
And ensuring that people understand the distinction that's a I guess you could say that's a philosophical issue, but not really. I don't think it's too. I mean, you could say that it's an obvious distinction. Obviously, if logic doesn't justify anything, but people don't understand that the natural state for people is to ignore that.
Okay.
So I'm not in favor of imposing ideologies on people.
No.
But I think that distinction. I don't think it would be I don't think it would be ideological tyranny to teach that distinction.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
I think it's important to teach that distinction. And logic has influenced religion, science, and politics tremendously.
Right.
But those things, religion, politics, and science, those influence people's attitudes towards logic.
Yes.
Okay. And so you have to. That's why individual leadership like Ramus, okay, that is I think as important as
So having the right person.
well, the ideas are the important things, but
With the right ideas.
but ideas don't spread unless people spread them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't take hold unless people believe them and accept them.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that
But you think we could get into a more booming period where we stop this decline?
Yeah, and on the prosperity that we've seen around the world, millions of people, hundreds of millions of people have been lifted from poverty.
Right.
Because of the assistance, the technology and such.
Yes.
And so that's a very, very good thing.
Yes, 100%.
But we're already seeing a lot of that backsliding.
Yeah.
Okay? And so actually during the colonial period, England and so forth, they at least had the appearance of trying to help people.
Right.
They ended up being pretty violent.
They had the appearance at least.
Their main objective was to trade.
Right.
And they thought that the way to help them was to convert them to Christianity.
Yeah, I remember that period.
And then they'll become more advanced. Mm-hmm. Now that's a good sentiment, all right. That's a good missionary sentiment.
Yeah, but
people don't want to be told what to believe.
No. Okay,
and then the thing is, what they should have done, and they didn't realize this at the time, what they should have done was taught them logic.
Yeah.
Okay, and if you teach people logic, then they have better tools to first of all to determine whether or not their current beliefs are in alignment with their values,
Right.
And if not, then they can choose other other values. That might have been a way more effective missionary tool to do that, and let them decide for themselves.
Forcing people into anything is not the right way to make it
That's
happen.
right. Yeah.
If you want your friend to like be healthier, like forcing it's not going to happen. You can lead by example. You can give them the knowledge. You can, but they have to do it themselves.
Yep,
I mean,
that's
so
right.
even something as basic as that.
Yeah, that's right.
People really resent being forced into something.
Exactly.
And it especially with those, when they were doing that with religion, it was pretty tyrannical in a sense. Like they would. Yeah, that's some scary stuff, man. But yeah. But they thought they were doing the right thing. You're right.
At the time, they thought they were doing the right
So a
thing.
lot of times villains think they're doing the right thing in history. They think they're justified.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah. But that's some interesting stuff that you brought here, man. That's crazy.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you being here. So I feel like you should just give people a few more if they want to figure out a way to study this on their own, or if there's anything else, because this is something you're really passionate about, and I can tell, and it's actually, this was really interesting. I had no idea, and hearing about those 4 different periods and everything, because I've always heard about the golden age and the bronze, there's always these themes that go throughout history, and also I had no idea that this kind of teaching was apparent in each of these times, So it always seems like it comes with these big booms in science and technology and everything. So I guess, just if there's anything else that you want to get out there before you go here.
Yeah, have a look at our websites.
100%.
Logicrules.org.
Yes.
Okay. I have a personal blog at oninfo.info.
Yes.
That has some stuff that I wrote personally.
Mm-hmm.
Logicrules.org, and then our Center for Logic and Business Communication is at logicandbusiness.org.
Okay.
So if any listeners think that their organizations can benefit from logic training, and oh, by the way, everyone can.
You think every organization can?
Every organization can benefit tremendously from logic training. I don't think there's a better thing that any organization can do for their people and for the organization and for their customers and for their investors than to invest in logic training.
Right.
So go to logicandbusiness.org, go to the contact sheet, send me a contact, or just email info@logicandbusiness.org.
But it can help your business. It can help so many things, right? I mean,
yes, people can.
I mean, you think it would benefit almost anybody.
And the CLBC, we're a nonprofit organization focused on training and research and education.
Yep.
So drop me an email.
So reach out to these guys.
Yeah, that's right. And so
that's awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you being here. I guess we're gonna call it good for today. But that was some really interesting and enlightening stuff.
Yeah, thanks again.
And my brain is still kind of just trying to make sense of it all. But actually, by the end of it now, I actually kind of understand what you're talking about now. I started to get it, man. That was a really interesting ride you took us on, man. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nick.
And thank you, everybody, for listening.
All right.